The sunlight streamed through the tall classroom windows like golden blades cutting across rows of silent desks, and the soft murmurs of students faded the moment Professor Elena Hart stepped into the lecture hall. No one expected the day to be different, until the impossible equation glared from the whiteboard like a taunt, and the janitor standing in the doorway unknowingly stepped into a moment that would change his life. Elena turned, her heels clicking sharply, and with a teasing smile she jokingly announced that anyone who could solve the equation would win her hand in marriage, an absurd challenge, thrown into the air like a joke no one was meant to take seriously. But when her eyes met those of Daniel Brooks, the quiet janitor in his navy uniform, something shifted, a story waiting to unfold, an old scar waiting to rise to the surface. If only she knew what pain he carried, what brilliance he had buried, and how this single challenge would unlock a truth hidden for years. Before we go deeper into this emotional journey, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unexpected stories. Your support truly helps us continue bringing such heart-touching narratives to you. The morning had begun like any other for Daniel, mopping the hallway floors while students and faculty passed by without noticing him. No one paid attention to the quiet man with tired eyes and worn-out gloves. He worked with steady, humble grace, avoiding attention, avoiding questions, avoiding the past that once defined him. Years ago, Daniel had been a brilliant mathematics researcher, praised for his sharp mind. But life had a way of breaking even the strongest spirits. The loss of his parents, the financial collapse that followed, and the betrayal of a close colleague who sabotaged his thesis had pushed him out of academia entirely. He had walked away from the world he once loved, choosing silence over recognition, peace over ambition. Becoming a janitor wasn't his dream, but it was the only life he could manage when survival mattered more than titles. Elena Hart, on the other hand, carried herself with elegance and confidence. She had earned her place as the department's rising star, a professor known for her passion, her precision, and her warm smile that made students feel they belonged. But even she had her hidden wounds, an upbringing filled with pressure to be perfect, a heart guarded after too many disappointments. Still, no one would ever guess that behind her polished exterior lived a woman yearning for authenticity, for someone who saw her as a person and not a pedestal. That morning, as she scribbled the equation, a notoriously unsolved expression from a research paper, in bright blue marker, the students stared at it with wide eyes. She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and joked that solving it would be enough to marry her. The students chuckled, no one took it seriously. But Daniel, passing by with cleaning supplies in hand, paused in the doorway. The equation on the board ignited a memory inside him, the last problem he had worked on before his world crumbled. His heart thudded painfully. He didn't want to look, didn't want to feel that old ache, but some invisible pull drew him closer to the board. And Elena noticed. Her smile was polite, curious, slightly amused as she saw him gaze at the equation. The students whispered, some smirking, assuming the janitor was out of place. But Daniel didn't care about their whispers. Something inside him stirred, battling the fear and suffocation he had carried for years. He stepped forward, quietly asking if he could try. The room fell silent, as if someone had cut the world's volume in half. Elena raised her brows, surprised but not unkind. She handed him the marker. Daniel stood before the board, his hand trembling not from lack of knowledge but from resurfacing memories. Every symbol, every variable whispered pieces of his old self. Slowly, methodically, he began writing. His movements were hesitant at first, then sharpened, then flowed with a grace Elena had never seen, not even from her top students. The murmurs behind him faded as the whiteboard filled with clean, precise steps, as though he were unlocking a door only he could see. Elena's amusement dissolved into fascination, then shock, and then something deeper, something like recognition. The final number circled back into place, the board complete. Daniel stepped back, breathing heavily, as if he had just dug up a buried version of himself. For a long moment, no one spoke. And then Elena stepped forward, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. She traced the final line with her gaze, checking each step, each transformation. It was flawless. Absolutely flawless. She felt her breath catch. The room erupted in whispers, astonishment, disbelief. But she didn't hear them. She only saw him, really saw him, for the first time. Daniel lowered his head, embarrassed, whispering that it was just an old problem he remembered. But Elena's voice softened as she told him that what he'd done wasn't something anyone could just remember. She asked him gently why he was working as a janitor. His silence was its own heartbreak. She could tell there was a story he wasn't ready to share, but she felt something bloom inside her, a respect, admiration, and a strange warmth she couldn't explain. Over the next weeks, something changed. Daniel became more visible, not because he tried, but because Elena made sure he knew he mattered. She invited him to the lounge for coffee, asked about his ideas, encouraged him to audit classes. Students who once looked past him now greeted him with genuine smiles. And slowly, painfully, he began to believe that maybe his life wasn't over, that maybe he still had something to offer the world. Elena found herself drawn to his quiet strength. The way he listened. The way he carried humility despite brilliance that could overshadow anyone. And Daniel discovered that her laughter wasn't arrogance, it was a melody that carried warmth. Their conversations grew longer, softer, more personal. The walls around both their hearts began to ease. But fear still lingered in Daniel's soul, the fear that he didn't deserve a place beside her. Until the day Elena approached him standing alone in the courtyard under the gentle afternoon sun, where the sky looked soft and endless. She told him she remembered her joke, "Solve this equation and I'll marry you." Her voice trembled slightly as she explained that she never meant it literally, but that what he solved that day was something far greater than math. He solved the lingering doubts in her heart about what real connection looks like. She told him he made her believe in people again, believe in goodness again. For the first time, Daniel lifted his eyes fully, letting himself feel the possibility of happiness. And she saw something break open inside him, something fragile and beautiful. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't need to. The way he looked at her was enough. If this story has touched your heart so far, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. Your support keeps these emotional stories alive. As days turned into weeks, Daniel slowly reclaimed the dreams he once abandoned. Elena stood beside him, not as a professor admiring a prodigy, but as a woman who saw men worth standing with. The university helped him re-enroll in advanced courses, and soon he became not just a familiar face but a respected mind again. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between early morning lectures and late afternoon coffees, their hearts found the courage to intertwine. Not because of an equation. Not because of a joke. But because kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections create miracles when we least expect them. Before we end, please comment below, second chances matter. Daniel didn't just solve an equation that day. He solved the moment that changed everything, showing the world, and himself, that no life is too broken to rise again, and no heart too damaged to love again. The rain poured like it hadn't in years, heavy and cold, drumming on the hood of an old red SUV stuck on the side of a lonely forest road. The world was gray, drenched, and almost silent except for the sound of thunder rolling through the clouds. Somewhere in that storm, a man with tired eyes and calloused hands slowed down his beat-up pickup truck when he saw the stranded vehicle. He didn't think twice. He pulled over, stepped into the downpour, and ran toward the woman struggling to loosen a flat tire bolt that refused to turn. He had no idea that this one act of kindness would change his life forever. He didn't know that the woman he was helping wasn't just anyone, she was the judge who held his fate in her hands. Sparkles, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and humanity, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Thread. It truly helps us keep spreading stories that touch the heart and remind us that one good deed can change everything. The man's name was Daniel Carter, a 36-year-old single dad trying to survive life one day at a time. His jeans were worn, his boots soaked, and his heart heavy with the weight of unpaid bills and court dates that seemed to never end. Once, he had everything, a happy marriage, a small carpentry business, and a home filled with laughter. But life had its storms too. His wife, Emily, passed away suddenly 3 years ago, leaving him with their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Since then, Daniel had been fighting to keep custody of his little girl after a bitter legal battle with his late wife's wealthy parents. Every court appearance drained him a little more. He wasn't perfect, he had lost his temper once, shouted at a social worker, and that was enough for the court to question his stability as a father. That afternoon, Daniel was returning from another failed job interview when he saw the stranded car. The woman standing beside it was dressed in a red business dress, soaked to her skin, her hair sticking to her face as she tried to use a wrench she clearly didn't know how to handle. Without a word, Daniel took it gently from her hand and crouched down beside the wheel. The rain stung his face, but he didn't stop until the job was done. The woman watched him silently, her eyes softening as she saw the quiet determination in his movements. When the spare tire was finally fixed, Daniel simply nodded and stood up, wiping his hands on his wet jeans. The woman thanked him, but he just smiled faintly and said it was nothing. She noticed his old truck, the child's drawing taped to the dashboard, and the car seat behind the passenger side. "Your daughter?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded with a tired smile. "Lily. She's everything I've got left." He didn't elaborate, didn't complain, didn't mention the court battles or his sleepless nights. He just walked back to his truck, ready to drive away. But the woman stopped him, insisting on giving him her business card as a token of thanks. He didn't even look at it, he just slipped it into his pocket and drove off into the rain. The next morning, Daniel stood nervously in a courtroom, holding his daughter's hand. It was the final custody hearing. He had been told this was his last chance. He prayed silently as the bailiff called for order, and the door opened. Then, his heart froze. Walking into the courtroom, wearing the same calm but piercing expression as yesterday, was the woman in the red dress, now in a black robe. Judge Rebecca Allen. For a moment, time stopped. She looked at him, recognition flashed in her eyes, but she said nothing. Professional, composed, unreadable. Daniel's heart pounded. He realized that the woman he had helped on that stormy road was the same person who would now decide whether he got to keep his daughter or lose her forever. As the hearing began, the opposing lawyer painted Daniel as an unstable, struggling man unfit to raise a child alone. He listed his debts, his failed business, and his lack of a stable home. Daniel sat there, every word cutting deeper than the last. When it was his turn to speak, his voice trembled but stayed honest. He didn't try to defend himself as perfect. He just said, "I may not have much, but my daughter has my heart. I tuck her in every night, I pack her lunch every morning, and I work every job I can find to give her a future. I can't give her luxury, but I can give her love, and I'll never stop trying." Judge Rebecca listened carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. She remembered how he had spoken to her the day before, no arrogance, no expectation of reward. Just simple kindness in the middle of his own storm. She remembered how he had smiled through exhaustion, how his truck had been falling apart yet carried a drawing made by his daughter that said, "Daddy is my hero." Something inside her softened, but she didn't let it show. She called for a short recess and left the courtroom. As she stood alone in her chambers, rain tapping gently on the window, she thought about how easy it was to judge a man by his mistakes instead of his efforts. She herself had been through a divorce years ago, had seen how the system sometimes overlooked the quiet warriors, the single parents who gave everything for their children. When she returned to the bench, the room was silent. Her ruling came slowly, carefully, but with warmth hidden in her words. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you may not have wealth, but what you have shown is love, responsibility, and perseverance. The court finds that Lily Carter will remain in your custody." Daniel's knees almost gave way. He looked at her, speechless, tears mixing with the faint smile trembling on his lips. The gavel struck once, but for him, it sounded like the heartbeat of hope. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, sunlight spilling through. Judge Rebecca stepped outside a few minutes later and found Daniel waiting, not to talk about the case, but simply to thank her. She didn't reveal anything about the previous day's encounter, she didn't need to. They both knew that sometimes life tests people in ways no courtroom ever could. She smiled, wished him luck, and watched him lift his daughter into his arms. Little Lily waved at her, her small voice echoing, "Thank you, lady," before Daniel carried her toward the truck. That evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, watching his daughter draw another picture. This one was of a man helping a woman beside a red car in the rain. She titled it, "Daddy Helps People." He smiled quietly, realizing how life had come full circle, how a single moment of compassion had saved not just his soul, but his future. Red Heart, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. Every click helps us share more stories of hope, humanity, and the power of simple kindness. And before you go, speech balloon comment below, do you believe one act of kindness can change someone's life forever? As Daniel turned off the light that night, holding Lily close, he looked out at the stars peeking through the clearing sky. The rain had washed away more than just the dirt on the road, it had washed away his despair, his fear, and his loneliness. For the first time in years, he whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not for what he received, but for the chance to give, even when he had nothing left. And somewhere, in her home across town, Judge Rebecca Allen smiled as she opened her briefcase. Inside, next to her case files, was the small, rain-stained card Daniel had given back to her when he refused her money. On it, in Lily's handwriting, were the words, "Daddy says kindness always comes back." The storm had passed. But the memory of that rainy day, of a stranger's selfless act, would forever remind them both that sometimes, fate doesn't need a courtroom to deliver justice. It only needs a little kindness. The morning sun crept gently into the tiny apartment, brushing against the worn-out curtains and falling across the face of a man who had forgotten what peace felt like. For years, Liam had lived in a world where rest was a luxury, where every sunrise meant a new battle, and where one little boy depended on him more than oxygen. But that morning, just before his eyes fully opened, he sensed something unusual, something warm but startling, something that made his heart skip the moment he realized he wasn't alone. Because standing just a few feet away, quietly sipping coffee in his oversized shirt, was the woman the world knew as a ruthless, untouchable CEO. And as Liam blinked himself awake, confused and breathless, she looked at him with a softness no one had ever seen in her eyes before. What she said next would freeze him in place and change the entire course of his life in ways he never imagined. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected miracles life can bring, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread to support more stories like this. Liam had not planned for any of this. He wasn't the kind of man who expected blessings to fall into his lap. In fact, life had taught him to expect the opposite. Ever since his wife passed away during childbirth, he had raised his son Noah alone, juggling multiple jobs, surviving on barely enough, and learning to love through brokenness. His days were a cycle of exhaustion and quiet hope. Every night he would watch Noah sleep and promise himself he would never give up, no matter how tired, how defeated, or how invisible he felt to the world. The world rarely noticed single fathers struggling in silence. Across the city, Elena Hartman was the complete opposite, sharp, powerful, iron-willed, and constantly surrounded by cameras, investors, and expectations she never asked for. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies, known for shutting down anyone who dared to underestimate her. But power often comes with a hollow echo, and behind her immaculate reputation were sleepless nights, loneliness disguised as confidence, and a heart that had forgotten how to feel anything gentle. People worshipped her success, but nobody saw the heaviness in her life. That changed the day she met Liam. They had collided in the most unexpected way, not through business or wealth, but through Noah. The little boy had wandered into the company's lobby during one of Liam's delivery jobs. Liam had panicked, embarrassed and overwhelmed, but instead of brushing them off, Elena had been strangely patient. Something about the single father's apologetic eyes and the child's innocent chatter pierced through her hardened exterior. She hadn't meant to invite them upstairs. She hadn't meant to ask questions. She definitely hadn't meant to feel anything. But that day spiraled into something new. Liam's gentle nature was refreshing. His humility contrasted her world of arrogance. His sincerity disarmed her. And little Noah, with his missing front tooth and endless questions, made her laugh, something she hadn't genuinely done in years. Still, nothing prepared Liam for what happened the night before the morning he found her in his shirt. Heavy rain had flooded the streets. Liam had tried to rush home with Noah, but his old car broke down. Elena, who was nearby after a late corporate meeting, saw them stranded. Without hesitation, she insisted they come with her. The storm worsened, leaving them no choice but to stay at Liam's apartment, the only place nearby that Noah felt safe. Liam had been embarrassed by his small, imperfect home, but Elena seemed untouched by the humble surroundings. Instead, she watched Noah fall asleep on the couch and something softened in her expression, something human and vulnerable. The night passed in quiet conversation, stories about dreams, failures, and the kind of pain only adulthood understands. Liam never imagined a woman like her could sit in his living room, barefoot and honest, listening to him like his words mattered. He offered her a t-shirt to sleep in, expecting her to keep her guarded distance. But her heart was shifting in ways she couldn't explain. That led to the morning where everything changed. When Liam woke up, he never expected to find the CEO, this woman who commanded rooms and built empires, standing in his kitchen, wearing his oversized shirt as if it belonged to her. The sunlight behind her painted her in soft gold, a stark contrast to the cold corporate lighting she lived under every day. For a moment, Liam wondered if he was dreaming. She looked peaceful, almost relieved, as if she had escaped a cage made of glass and expectations. She noticed his stunned expression and smiled, the smallest, gentlest smile he had ever seen. That alone froze him, but what she said next shook the ground beneath him. She told him that she hadn't felt this safe, this human, this connected in years. She confessed that being in his home, around Noah, around someone who didn't want anything from her, felt like stepping into a life she never knew she was allowed to hope for. And then, with a trembling honesty, she added that she wanted to be part of something real, something soft, something she had forgotten how to let herself feel. She wanted to know what it meant to belong somewhere, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a woman. And she whispered that she wasn't sure why, but she felt that belonging here, with them. Liam was speechless. His world had always been small, fragile, and unremarkable. He had never thought someone like her would see anything in him. But the truth reflected in her eyes wasn't pity or curiosity, it was longing, respect, and an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, both of them were exactly what the other needed. Days turned into weeks, and their unexpected connection grew into something neither had planned but both deeply needed. Elena would visit often, spending time not in boardrooms but in small moments, helping Noah with homework, sharing meals, laughing in the kitchen, discovering warmth she thought she would never feel again. Liam learned to trust again, slowly letting himself believe that love wasn't something reserved for others. He saw how Elena relaxed around them, how the armor she wore every day melted the moment she stepped through his door. She wasn't the CEO then, she was just Elena, a woman who finally allowed herself to be seen. But with every growing bond comes fear. Liam worried he wasn't enough. He feared the world would eventually take her back, that he would wake up one day and realize he had been foolish to dream. Elena, too, battled her own insecurities. She feared her world could hurt them, that her status would complicate everything, that she wasn't capable of the softness they deserved. Yet every time these fears surfaced, Noah would do something simple, a hug, a drawing, a giggle, and remind them both that love doesn't need permission or perfection. It just needed honesty. And honesty was the bridge that held them together. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. Your support keeps these emotional stories alive. Before the ending, please comment below, kindness still exists. In the end, what began as an ordinary morning became the beginning of a new chapter neither of them expected. Liam realized he didn't have to face the world alone anymore. Elena realized she didn't have to hide behind power to feel worthy. And Noah gained something every child deserves, a home filled with laughter, safety, and love. Together, they formed a small, imperfect, beautiful family born from one extraordinary morning and one sentence that changed everything. And as life continued, they learned that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones written in headlines but the ones built quietly inside the walls of a humble home, where hearts heal, hope returns, and second chances bloom when you least expect them.